Good afternoon. Thank you. It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister. And I've agreed with Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of our backbench MPs, that the process of choosing that new leader should begin now. And the timetable will be announced next week. And I've today appointed a cabinet to serve, as I will, until a new leader is in place. So I want to say to the millions of people who voted for us in 2019, many of them voting Conservative for the first time, thank you for that incredible mandate, the biggest Conservative majority since 1987, the biggest share of the vote since 1979. And the reason I have fought so hard in the last few days to continue to deliver that mandate in person was not just because I wanted to do so, but because I felt it was my job, my duty, my obligation to you to continue to do what we promised in 2019. And of course, I'm immensely proud of the achievements of this government, from getting Brexit done to settling our relations with the continent for over half a century, reclaiming the power for this country to make its own laws in Parliament, getting us all through the pandemic, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, the fastest exit from lockdown, and in the last few months, leading the West in standing up to Putin's aggression in Ukraine. And let me say now to the people of Ukraine that I know that we in the UK will continue to back your fight for freedom for as long as it takes. And at the same time, in this country, we've been pushing forward a vast programme of investment in infrastructure and skills and technology, the biggest in a century, because if I have one insight into human beings, it is that genius and talent and enthusiasm and imagination are evenly distributed throughout the population, but opportunity is not. And that's why we must keep levelling up, keep unleashing the potential of every part of the United Kingdom. And if we can do that in this country, we will be the most prosperous in Europe. And in the last few days, I've tried to persuade my colleagues that it would be eccentric to change governments when we're delivering so much, and when we have such a vast mandate, and when we're actually only a handful of points behind in the polls, even in mid-term after quite a few months of pretty relentless sledging, and when the economic scene is so difficult domestically and internationally. And I regret not to have been successful in those arguments, and of course it's painful not to be able to see through so many ideas and projects myself. But as we've seen at Westminster, the herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves. And my friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable. And our brilliant and Darwinian system will produce another leader equally committed to taking this country forward through tough times, not just helping families to get through it, but changing and improving the way we do things, cutting burdens on businesses and families, and yes, cutting taxes, because that is the way to generate the growth and the income we need to pay for great public services. And to that new leader, I say, whoever he or she may be, I say I will give you as much support as I can. And to you, the British public, I know that there will be many people who are relieved, and perhaps quite a few who will also be disappointed. And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks. I want to thank Carrie and our children and all the members of my family who have had to put up with so much for so long. I want to thank the peerless British civil service for all the help and support that you have given our police, our emergency services, and of course our fantastic NHS, who at critical moment helped to extend my own period in office, as well as our armed services and our agencies that are so admired around the world, and our indefatigable Conservative Party members and supporters, whose selfless campaigning makes our democracy possible. I want to thank the wonderful staff here at Chequers, here at number 10, and of course at Chequers, and our fantastic prop force detectives, the one group, by the way, who never leak. Above all, I want to thank you, the British public, for the immense privilege that you have given me. And I want you to know that from now on, until the new Prime Minister is in place, your interests will be served and the government of the country will be carried on. Being Prime Minister is an education in itself. I've travelled to every part of the United Kingdom, and in addition to the beauty of our natural world, I found so many people possessed of such boundless British originality and so willing to tackle old problems in new ways that I know that even if things can sometimes seem dark now, our future together is golden. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
And there he goes, Boris Johnson's words to the nation as he stepped down as leader of the Conservative Party, and the applause of his supporters, his wife, a pretty emotional couple of supporters, I can tell you. I saw the faces of Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries looking visibly moved by what was going on. And so Boris Johnson there talked about the brilliant and Darwinian system of British government that will give way to a new leader. The survival of the fittest will deliver a new Prime Minister, but he told the country in the meantime that the government would go on, his mandate would be delivered, and that the interests of the British people would be delivered. Let's go over to Gary Gibbon and Kathy, who are in the central lobby.
Thanks, Krish. Gary, I know you've been listening into that statement as best you can from here. Give us what you thought he said.
Interestingly, we were talking a bit before about the timetable. A lot of MPs wanting him out of that building as fast as possible. He's still clearly intending to stay there until the party conference in October, potentially. He did say, though, that the timetable will be announced by the 22 executive on Monday. This might sound quite petty, the sort of row about how long an interim Prime Minister stays there, but this is no ordinary interim Prime Minister. This is a guy who has had abusive letters fired at him from people who were serving in his government until, hours, days ago, and he's had an amazing volley of them. And it was interesting to try and work out how reconciled he is to this. We know that last night he was intending to fight on. Quite often Boris Johnson says one thing at night and then people have come in the next morning to discover he's saying the polar opposite. That's what's happened here, but is he reconciled to it? Is he actually going to be, as it were, a bit of a Dominic Cummings to the next person that comes in, sort of firing off salvos and unhelpful criticisms? And he talked about how he didn't particularly respect the judgment that had been operated by MPs who decided to get rid of him. He talked about herd instinct and how they move together. He talked about how he'd been trying to persuade them that he should stay to carry on delivering the things that he had a massive mandate to deliver. Regret, pain. It didn't sound to me like a man who was reconciled to his role, and it will make some people wonder, how will this interim administration run? Of course, the other thing that's obviously kicking off immediately is the leadership contest. People coming to the microphones, telling you who they're backing, all sorts of meetings happening around Parliament, people tapping people up, trying to win them over. The first moves can be very, very important in all of this, and we will watch them carefully.
Gary, thanks very much. Well, let's turn now to our guest that we have here, Chris Philp, who quit as Technology Minister within the last 24 hours, and Caroline Nokes, who was one of the first to submit a letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister, Chair of the Women and Equalities Committee. Chris Philp first, what did you make of what you heard from Boris Johnson just then?
Well, look, I think it was a goodbye message. Clearly, he was just trying to draw a line under his premiership, pointing out, of course, some of the things that he's achieved. I think he'll be proud of what he achieved in Ukraine.
Quite a small list, though, wasn't it?
Well, look, I mean, he can be proud. He can be genuinely proud about what he's achieved in Ukraine. He can be proud about the vaccine rollout, about the fact he delivered Brexit against all of the odds, won that landslide victory. Of course, we all know what the problems were. That's why I resigned very early this morning, but I think it is right to keep in mind those achievements at the same time as well.
Is it right to keep him in office throughout the summer or not?
Well, I don't have very strong views on this, to be honest. The convention is that the outgoing Prime Minister does stay on in a caretaker capacity. It's what Theresa May did, and before her, David Cameron. Of course, the convention is also that the caretaker Prime Minister does not introduce significant new policy or legislation during that time. I think there are two things that are really important. One is that we just have an orderly functioning government for the coming weeks and months, or weeks hopefully, which the Prime Minister alluded to, so that basic things get done. And secondly, we have the leadership contest in a relatively quick time frame. We need to make sure we make the right choice, but we shouldn't take too long over it.
I'll come back to that leadership contest in just a minute. Caroline Noakes, should he go and go straight away in your view?
Well, look, I think that Dominic Raab did a great job as caretaker Prime Minister at the start of COVID. I think he's proved that he has the capability to do that, and he could bring a caretaker government together just in a very short interim period. I want to see a short timetable for us to elect the new Prime Minister. I think it matters that that's done at pace. And so my view is that we should say thank you to Boris Johnson for his service, but actually we could do with somebody coming in straight away to try and bring us and the country back together.
Right, what kind of candidate do you have in mind for that?
Well, look, I think Dominic Raab can be a great caretaker candidate.
The actual
and the
leader.
new leader, and I would love to see one in place ASAP. You know, I think we want somebody who's going to be a unifying force. I think it's absolutely imperative that we pull together for the interest of the country. We've got some really tough decisions coming down the tracks with cost of living, and I think I want somebody who has proven that they can speak competently on the economy. I want somebody who is going to be experienced and thoughtful.
Rishi Sunak?
Well, I think there are many candidates who could do it. Rishi is one of them. I think Nadhim Zahawi is another. I would like to see Penny Mordaunt given a chance. I think there are lots of candidates, and we have to whittle them down fast. The MPs need to make a decision before we rise for summer recess.
Chris, have you got someone in mind?
No, I don't. I was, fully engaged in ministerial duties until just a few hours ago. So
I'm sure you've been lobbied already.
I haven't. Well, that is true. I haven't really turned my mind to it. But I do agree with the criteria which Caroline set out a moment ago. Somebody who can unify the party and the country, who's got the experience and the credibility to provide leadership, particularly on the economy, but also more widely in what are very difficult times. So we have an important decision to make. We need to make it quickly, as Caroline rightly said, but we need to get it right as well.
But when you look at the damage that has been done in the last 24 hours, some would say by the Prime Minister's decisions on the economy and elsewhere during his time in office, how is it possible for the Tories to regain trust?
Well, of course it's possible for us to regain trust. We have a big parliamentary majority. I want a new leader who's going to set out with clarity their vision, their direction. And of course we have a Labour Party that has been consistently failing over the last few years. So I think we absolutely can do it, but I think speed is now of the essence.
How big's the task, though, of rebuilding trust?
Oh, look, I think the task is significant. I don't underestimate that at all, but I think that we need to have a really strong approach to the cost of living crisis. I think we need to revert to being compassionate Conservatives. I'm a great One Nation Tory. I would love to see somebody from my wing of the party, but I also want to see them in government. We need to have a cabinet that embraces the fact that the Conservative Party is and always has been a broad church. I was delighted to see Greg Clark brought back in. Let's hope that that's the first of many such appointments.
Compassionate Conservatives or tax-cutting Conservatives?
Well, they're not mutually exclusive. You can be compassionate in delivering good public services and looking after people in genuine need. That's why
the old cakeism, isn't it?
No, it's not. That's why we've increased the minimum wage from £5.93 an hour to £9.50 an hour. That's why we've taken people out of tax entirely by raising the threshold. That's why we've invested record amounts of money in the NHS. That's why we've introduced the pupil premium to help poorer children. That's compassionate conservatism in action. But at the same time, you can have conservatism that keeps taxes low, that reduces regulation, that stimulates economic growth. And by doing that, of course, it generates the tax revenue that pays for that compassionate conservatism. So not only can you have both, you need to have both.
Was Boris Johnson an aberration as Prime Minister? Should he never have been Prime Minister?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I think Boris Johnson was a brilliant campaigning Prime Minister. He took us to a historic general election victory, the like of which I hadn't seen since I was at school.
Is that what you say about him privately?
Absolutely, that's what I've always said, that Boris Johnson was a brilliant campaigner. He showed us how to win an election. He performed brilliantly in that campaign in 2019. So yeah, that's absolutely what I've said about him privately and publicly, is that as a campaigner, he was unmatched. Unfortunately, in government, I was disappointed by him.
Chris?
Well, I think we are going to remember Boris's great successes in the 2019 election. Landslide election victory is foremost amongst those, as Caroline said a second ago. You know, he got Brexit, whatever your views on Brexit, he got Brexit delivered against the odds. No one thought he could do it.
Well, there's a small matter of the Northern Ireland Protocol.
He's provided extraordinary leadership on Ukraine. He's been by far the leading European figure and globally, really second only to President Biden, in helping Ukraine in their hour of need. The vaccine rollout was world leading as well. So those are incredible accomplishments. Obviously, there were some serious problems as well, which Caroline hinted at, and it's why I resigned this morning. But I think it's only fair to remember these great achievements of Boris Johnson's as well.
Vaccine rollout keeps getting mentioned. Brexit, not entirely done in some ways, if you look at the Northern Ireland Protocol. Ukraine, is that a legacy?
Yeah, that absolutely is a legacy, and I think it's one that Boris Johnson will look back on and be very proud of. He has been Prime Minister through arguably the toughest time this country has faced since the Second World War. Nobody pretended it was going to be easy for him going in back in 2019. He had to sort Brexit, but none of us predicted the pandemic, did we? None of us knew that Russia was going to invade the Ukraine back when he first became Prime Minister. So look, it is a legacy, and I think it is one that he should be proud of.
He nearly died in the pandemic. He's lived through the pandemic, he's lived through Ukraine, Brexit delivered, an extraordinary time in number 10. What do you think he'll do with all those memories and, you know, that legacy?
Well, there's a very famous quote from Churchill. Churchill said towards the end of his time in office, "History will be kind to me because I intend to write that history myself," and I rather think Boris Johnson might do that.
Caroline?
Yeah, he'll write a lot of books, he will speak a lot, he will be a global player. I suspect there will be a big demand for him in the States and indeed further afield.
And of course he was born in America.
Absolutely, and you know, I wish him every success in that.
Do you think he'll go on the circuit?
Well, look, I don't know. It's up to Boris. He's got a young family as well, so he needs to think about them. I'm not sure what he'll choose to do, but he's a man of incredible talents. He's a great orator. He's a great writer. So I'm pretty sure he'll remain a larger-than-life part of our national conversation.
Now, are either of you throwing your hat in the ring for the leadership?
Absolutely not, no.
I was going to vote for you. No, I'm not either, no.
Right, okay. So you're being very coy, but tell me about the kind of lobbying that's going on behind the scenes.
Well, I mean, I was completely immersed in government work until just a few hours ago. I was working on the gambling reforms, which are very, very imminent to protect people at risk of gambling addiction. I was working on the online safety bill, which Carol and I have discussed a lot. That's coming, taken through 50 hours of committee deliberations. It's due to come to report stage next week. So I was totally immersed in all of that work. It's one of the reasons that it took me quite a long time to resign, because I didn't want to relinquish those or walk away from those heavy responsibilities. So I haven't really been following it at all. I was doing an interview earlier and someone's campaign manager attempted to lobby me in front of a TV camera, which luckily wasn't running. So that is all going to be happening as we speak. But to be honest, you know, right now, I haven't really given it much thought.
You talked about those heavy responsibilities. Obviously, he's moved quite quickly to appoint some cabinet ministers, but some of those ministers who resigned, such as yourself, for example, might have to rejoin the government. Would you do that under this Prime Minister?
I haven't been asked, and I'm not sort of agitating for it. But if I'm asked to serve the country in some capacity, then whatever that capacity is, you know, I'll do it. And if I can help get that bill, the online safety bill, through Parliament, I've spent, I mean, months and months of my life, hours and hours, working on getting that bill as good as it can be. And I'll do whatever I can to help the government in any capacity get it through Parliament next week. I think all of us are here to serve, I think.
So you're unresigning live on air?
I'm not unresigning. No, I'm not unresigning. That's really naughty, Kathy. And I explicitly said I'm not looking for a job. And I resigned, and when you resign...
said if you were asked to serve,
and if
you might be persuaded.
Yeah, I'm not unresigning. I'm not looking for it. But if someone wants me to help out with a piece of important legislation, there is a public duty involved. I'm not unresigning. That's a very naughty thing to say.
OK, Chris Philp, not unresigning. Caroline Noakes, thank you both very much for joining us. Let's go back now to Krish in Downing Street.
Thanks, Kathy. So how is news of Boris Johnson's resignation going down across the country? Our correspondent Andy Davis is in Wells in Somerset, a Conservative seat, but one that the Lib Dems have firmly in their sights. Andy.
Well, there were actually a few people who hadn't heard the news until we told them a short while ago, and as you'd expect, there wasn't much surprise. Just as we were going on air, we were watching this programme on our iPhones. Someone peered over our shoulders and said, "Oh, has he gone?" Finally, with a big, broad smile. There are some who are clearly jubilant at this news. There are others who said they were feeling very sorry for the Prime Minister, but I think generally a sense from quite a few we spoke to that whoever they'd voted for in the past, that if that if Boris Johnson is going to leave Downing Street, as he said he will, that this exit from Downing Street should be sooner rather than later.
I just think he should go. Right, let's have a clear-cut thing and have him gone. Couldn't be more delighted to hear the news that he's resigning.
He's had such a hard time with it, and basically I'm not a Conservative, so I've never been a Conservative really, but I do feel sorry for him, yeah. I think the media's not helped, to be honest.
How can he stay on till the autumn? I know we need stability in the country, but is he the right person to offer that stability? Who else would do that?
Well, I'm overjoyed. He should never have been there in the first place. He's not got the integrity or the intelligence. So, I'm main chuffed.
I think he should go as soon as possible. I think he's toxic, and I think the longer he stays in position, the worse it's going to be for the party. But I'm not a Conservative voter either, so that's okay by me.
I was quite happy that he got in as Prime Minister. I thought he would make a very good one. But obviously, the way all the lies has been told and that kind of thing, I think the best thing for him to do is to actually go now.
He's done a fantastic job in his own way. We all backed him because we loved his spirit and his drive. I just hope we can find somebody else with the same drive.
This is going to be one of those interesting seats at a future general election. The Tories have a majority of just under 10,000 here, but the Lib Dems will be looking to target a seat like this. They're re-energised in the southwest of England. They've got that adrenaline shot from the Tiverton and Honiton by-election where they swept aside a 24,000 Tory majority. But that was a by-election, and it was a by-election with Boris Johnson at the helm of the Conservative Party. And the question now is it going to be easier with him gone for the Tories to defend seats like this? And when you ask people here that question, they say, well, that depends on who the next leader is. And when you ask them who do they think the next leader should be, it's met with a lot of, I don't know. Back to you in London.
Andy Davis in Wales, thank you. Well, speaking of next leaders, Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, one of the few who didn't resign, of course, says the PM has made the right decision. The government under Boris's leadership had many achievements, delivering Brexit, vaccines and backing Ukraine. We need calmness and unity now, and to keep governing while the new leader is found. Can't think who she has in mind. If you've just joined us, in the last few minutes, Boris Johnson has given his resignation speech as Conservative leader here in Downing Street after failing to persuade his cabinet colleagues that he could fight on. Let's just listen to that statement again.
Everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you. It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister. And I've agreed with Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of our backbench MPs, that the process of choosing that new leader should begin now. And the timetable will be announced next week. And I've today appointed a cabinet to serve, as I will, until a new leader is in place. So I want to say to the millions of people who voted for us in 2019, many of them voting Conservative for the first time, thank you for that incredible mandate, the biggest Conservative majority since 1987, the biggest share of the vote since 1979. And the reason I have fought so hard in the last few days to continue to deliver that mandate in person was not just because I wanted to do so, but because I felt it was my job, my duty, my obligation to you to continue to do what we promised in 2019. And of course, I'm immensely proud of the achievements of this government, from getting Brexit done to settling our relations with the continent for over half a century, reclaiming the power for this country to make its own laws in Parliament, getting us all through the pandemic, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, the fastest exit from lockdown, and in the last few months, leading the West in standing up to Putin's aggression in Ukraine. And let me say now to the people of Ukraine that I know that we in the UK will continue to back your fight for freedom for as long as it takes. And at the same time, in this country, we've been pushing forward a vast programme of investment in infrastructure and skills and technology, the biggest in a century, because if I have one insight into human beings, it is that genius and talent and enthusiasm and imagination are evenly distributed throughout the population, but opportunity is not. And that's why we must keep levelling up, keep unleashing the potential of every part of the United Kingdom. And if we can do that in this country, we will be the most prosperous in Europe. And in the last few days, I've tried to persuade my colleagues that it would be eccentric to change governments when we're delivering so much and when we have such a vast mandate and when we're actually only a handful of points behind in the polls, even in mid-term after quite a few months of pretty relentless sledging, and when the economic scene is so difficult domestically and internationally. And I regret not to have been successful in those arguments, and of course it's painful not to be able to see through so many ideas and projects myself. But as we've seen at Westminster, the herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves. And my friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable. And our brilliant and Darwinian system will produce another leader equally committed to taking this country forward through tough times, not just helping families to get through it, but changing and improving the way we do things, cutting burdens on businesses and families, and yes, cutting taxes, because that is the way to generate the growth and the income we need to pay for great public services. And to that new leader, I say, whoever he or she may be, I say I will give you as much support as I can. And to you, the British public, I know that there will be many people who are relieved, and perhaps quite a few who will also be disappointed. And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks. I want to thank Carrie and our children and all the members of my family who have had to put up with so much for so long. I want to thank the peerless British civil service for all the help and support that you have given our police, our emergency services, and of course our fantastic NHS, who at critical moment helped to extend my own period in office, as well as our armed services and our agencies that are so admired around the world, and our indefatigable Conservative Party members and supporters, whose selfless campaigning makes our democracy possible. I want to thank the wonderful staff here at Chequers, here at Number 10, and of course at Chequers, and our fantastic prop force detectives, the one group, by the way, who never leak. Above all, I want to thank you, the British public, for the immense privilege that you have given me. And I want you to know that from now on until the new Prime Minister is in place, your interests will be served and the government of the country will be carried on. Being Prime Minister is an education in itself. I've travelled to every part of the United Kingdom, and in addition to the beauty of our natural world, I found so many people possessed of such boundless British originality and so willing to tackle old problems in new ways that I know that even if things can sometimes seem dark now, our future together is golden. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Well, welcome back to Parliament's Central Lobby, where Paul McNamara, our policy correspondent, is here. He's been checking out who is running, what are the runners and riders. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of jostling for position. Even, the ink isn't dry on that speech that the Prime Minister gave, but tell us what's happening.
Well, there is a lot going on, and the list has changed, the runners and riders, in the last, 15, 16 hours since we last spoke about this. A couple of names have announced publicly that they will either be running or at least considering running. So there's about 10 serious names now in consideration. Let's look at the first group. These are, let's call them the Loyalists. We've got Ben Wallace, Liz Truss, Nadhim Zahawi, Penny Mordaunt, and as of last night, Suella Braverman. So Ben Wallace, Defence Secretary, he's consistently come out top with party members in polls. He does very well.
Since Ukraine, it has to be said.
Yeah, since Ukraine, before Ukraine, a lot of people didn't really know who he was. His profile has risen considerably. He's liked by the public. There are questions, though, about whether or not he actually wants it. Next on the list, Liz Truss. I don't think there's any doubt about whether or not she wants it. She's currently jetting back from Indonesia, cut a trip short. Suspicion that she's going to be making a speech later on. Nadhim Zahawi, very short-lived. Chancellor, Penny Mordaunt. No announcement of intent yet from Penny Mordaunt, but sources tell me that she has a team that is actually campaigning at the moment. Then, as of last night, Suella Braverman, the Attorney General, she was asked live on air, will you consider running? Now, at this point, she was still Attorney General. She is still Attorney General. She had said at that point that she wanted Boris Johnson to step down, had not resigned, but said that she would be putting herself forward.
Is she just throwing her hat in the ring to get a job under the next one, though?
Who knows? I mean, that's always the consideration for anyone that puts their name out there, right? But I mean, she's already got a team. She's already got one of her junior ministers, Jason McCartney. He's running her campaign. As of this morning, she's even got a public backer, Desmond Swain, saying he'll be backing her. The next list, let's think of these maybe outsiders or people who are outside the tent. Rishi Sunak, Sajid Javid, Tom Tugendhat, Jeremy Hunt, and again, as of this morning, announcing he was considering running arch-Brexiteer Steve Baker. All right, first off, the comeback kid, Rishi Sunak. A couple of months ago, he was all but written off. Tax affairs, exposed of his wife's non-dom tax status, his US green card, but he's still liked. He is second in the bookies' charts of who's most likely to come out, so he's got a strong chance. Sajid Javid, he's run before. Tom Tugendhat, now he is very popular among centrist Tory MPs.
But he's never done a ministerial job, has he?
No, but he's been the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He's done a very good job of that. So there's someone who, well, if he doesn't make it to the shortlist, there's one person who could actually put himself in a very good position for a cabinet job later on. Then we've got Jeremy Hunt. He seems to back himself much more than the bookies do, it has to be said. And the last on the list, Steve Baker. This morning, he was asked about whether or not he would run. He said that he's been asked by lots of other MPs to run, and he said, quote, it would be dismissive and disrespectful if he did not heed expressions of support. Crucially, though, whoever runs, it needs to be sorted out in the next 2 weeks before this place, Parliament, shuts down for recess. That whoever runs needs to be whittled down to 2 candidates, and then it will be Tory party members who decide basically on behalf of the whole country who ends up running the place.
Paul, you're going to have a very busy few weeks. Thanks very much for giving us that update, Paul McNamara. Well, let's turn now to Lord Kerslake, Lord Bob Kerslake, who's former head of the Civil Service. I want to just take you back to last night in Downing Street, because we were here this time yesterday, all day. A completely frantic day. What would the Civil Service, the Cabinet Secretary, have been saying to the Prime Minister? Would civil servants be having kittens about his apparent refusal to bow to the politically inevitable?
Well, I hope he would have been saying we can't go on like this, because it was quite clear last night that the position we were in was unsustainable. Over a third of the government had resigned, unprecedented. And he also would have been saying, I hope, that he shouldn't even think about going to the Queen and asking for a dissolution of Parliament.
Which was an option that was being touted around, wasn't it?
Yeah, and he didn't rule it out in the Parliamentary Liaison Committee. He explicitly didn't. But it would have been unprecedented and would have caused a huge constitutional issue.
I'll come back to the Constitution in a minute, but how much damage has the last few days done to the kind of standing of British democracy, of Parliament, of MPs, of politics?
I think it will have done some damage. It's been theatre, some would say circus really, and people have watched it with almost disbelief. I have to say, I think the damage leading up to the last few days has been probably greater in the way in which it has undermined the trust of the British public in politicians. We know that many people think that politicians are only in it for themselves and that they can't be trusted, they can't be believed. I think the last few years, particularly Partygate, have kind of reinforced that view amongst many people. That's where I think the real damage has been and where we need to focus going forward.
When you look at the record number of ministerial resignations in the last few days, some cabinet ministers have been appointed. There's a lot of ministerial posts to fill. As in your former vantage point, head of the Civil Service, how difficult is that to keep the government running if Boris Johnson stays and doesn't appoint an interim Prime Minister?
Very difficult. Now, it has to be said that if you take the last two resignations from leader of the Conservative Party, Theresa May, David Cameron, they both continued until a new leader had been elected and became the Prime Minister. So that bit of the process is not unusual.
And that's the sort of constitutional position, or it's not written down,
it's the kind of accepted practice, basically, now from a number of occasions. It's really down to the Prime Minister, usually, whether they wish to stay on. And those two did, to give continuity. Two things that are different here. One is the reason why the Prime Minister has gone, which is a loss of trust. I think that's materially different. Secondly, that we've had 59 ministerial resignations, unprecedented again. It's going to be exceptionally difficult to fill them quickly. Normally you have a lot of advance notice when a reshuffle's coming. You haven't got it this time. And also, because the Prime Minister is saying he will stay on, it seems likely that either he or they will choose not to appoint them again back into their roles.
So with your experience in the civil service, is it possible to have a fully functioning government under Boris Johnson?
I think it's possible to have a partially functioning government under Boris Johnson, and probably enough to get us over the line in the next few months. Bear in mind, we've got 2 weeks to recess when Parliament closes. We then got the break, and then we come back to party conferences. So not going to be easy if there are any big crises. Are people going to feel comfortable that he's at the helm when they happen? Normal legislation, though, uncontroversial stuff can carry on. So I think it's at best partial, and I can see why others are arguing it might have been better for him to have made a clean break at this point.
What would you argue if you were in number 10 now?
I think he's done a deal with Graham Brady, and that's why...
Chair of the 1922
committee, and therefore I think it's a done deal. We have to make the best of it. That's my personal view.
Right, so if you were head of the civil service now, you'd be saying, we'll do what we can, Prime Minister, but it'll be difficult.
I think we'll do what we can, and it will be difficult. It's a good summation of it all.